Okay, one more time. Part 3, I promise, then we'll be done. Last 10 minutes or so of Gigi and Mike's review of The Red Pill. Here is where we left off.
Here's why I don't think that the it will gain steam is because I think there's something in the masculine psyche where you don't want to talk about your problems, and you don't want to complain. It's a lot more masculine to just battle through.
Now, this is actually why I have some hope for Mike. I mean, he gets it in a way that a lot of people, men and women, and especially women like Gigi, really just don't. I mean, the relevant quote here, I think, is, sort of a quote that's famous in the men's movement is women's greatest strength is their facade of weakness, and men's greatest weakness is their facade of strength. Now, it's not that men have nothing to complain about, it's that there is indeed something in the masculine psyche that discourages complaining. And it's not that women necessarily have anything to complain about, it's that there's something in the feminine psyche that encourages complaining. Now, to what degree those tendencies are biological in origin or culturally imposed, that's an open question. I will, however, draw your attention to a few biological differences between men and women that support the notion that there is indeed a biological basis for this difference. So, some of this difference can be explained by biology. During childhood, boys and girls have the same capacity to weep emotional tears. While there's some evidence that boys engage in psychological strategies to distract themselves from emotional distress in order to head tears off at the pass, it's kind of difficult to actually figure out whether boys are wired to engage in these strategies or whether they're socialized into them by, cultural norms around masculinity. But what we do know is that once puberty hits, the entire physiological mechanism regarding tear production changes in men. Their tear glands get less productive, and simultaneously, their tear ducts get larger. This means that not only do they produce fewer tears than women do, they need to build more tears up before those tears are going to spill onto their cheeks. Now, in strict physiological terms, women evolved to be criers, and men evolved in such a way that visibly weeping is just not that common a behavior for men. It's actually inhibited by their physiology. More than this, the emotional tears of women contain chemicals male tears, even emotional ones, don't. Oxytocin's a big one, which, when absorbed through the lining of the nose, makes people more affiliative and trusting. Studies have found that administering oxytocin through a nasal spray makes people more likely to succumb to a sales pitch. Other pheromones found in women's emotional tears, but not men's, cause an immediate drop in libido, aggression, and testosterone levels in men exposed to them. So, is it any wonder that women seem predisposed to whinging, while men seem predisposed towards stoicism? Anyhow, all of that said, let's see what Gigi has to say about what Mike just said, because y'all know she's going to have something to say.
But they do talk about their problems and they do complain. It's literally the MRA is like a beautiful refuge
That
for angry men.
Gigi, that's the whole point. That's his whole point. MRAs complain. That's why most men don't want anything to do with them. It's literally men complaining about their problems, or women complaining on behalf of men, I suppose. And that's why it's unpopular and frowned upon by both men and women. Because men aren't supposed to complain, Gigi. It's not masculine. Are you starting to see why the MRM gets constantly maligned as a bunch of losers who live in their mother's basements and can't get laid? Because a man who complains about his lot in life is just unsuccessful as a man. He's not in his man box. He's being unmanly, and nobody wants to see that, do they?
that's right. That's why I'm saying it will never be a large movement.
A lot of men are angry.
Yeah. And when they're angry, they're seen as dangerous and hateful. Isn't that a lovely catch-22? Complain and you're a pathetic loser. Shout and you're scary. Either way, no one should be paying attention to what you're saying. They should just be avoiding you.
I don't think that. I think that the MRA isn't going to be is never going to gain enormous traction and become like a huge movement because they are not a disenfranchised group. Men are not a
Well, let me finish.
disenfranchised group.
How do you know this, Gigi? I mean, let's look at some actual metrics. Life expectancy, access to health care and housing, reproductive rights, access to education, educational attainment, access to social services, discrimination in the criminal justice system, discrimination in family court, rates of homelessness, rates of violent victimization, rates of victimization by state violence, rates of suicide and substance abuse, rates of unemployment and underemployment, and rates of death and injury on the job. Now, if all of these metrics showed worse outcomes for blacks than whites, I'm sure you would use them as evidence that blacks were being disenfranchised in society. Yet most of these metrics apply more substantively to men when compared to women than they do to blacks when compared to whites. The gender gap in the criminal system, for instance, is 6 times wider than the race gap between blacks and whites. And yet men are not disenfranchised as a group. In fact, all of these metrics are evidence of patriarchy, a system you describe as being set up to benefit men.
Society. They're just not.
Okay.
That's just
The reason why
ridiculous.
I don't think more men will stand up for men's rights is because it's just much more in the masculine psyche to just battle through and just be like, yeah, some shit sucks, but
That's life.
That's life. Oh, if only you feminists were able to take your own advice, the world would be so much less annoying. If only feminists were able to look at a man sitting with his knees apart on the subway and say, well, he's got balls and a narrower pelvis than I do, so he sits the way he's most comfortable sitting. That's life. Instead, feminists have constructed some kind of bizarro conspiracy theory that men who sit the way they are most comfortable on the subway, they're actually doing it intentionally to assert their patriarchal dominance over public spaces and reinforce the subordination of women, or some shit like that.
Suffering is universal.
Yeah, suffrage and suffering are universal in the West, anyway. I find this kind of hilarious when one of the moments in the Red Pill that got one of the biggest chuckles from the audience was when a male feminist repeatedly used the term women's suffrage when he clearly meant women's suffering. Regardless of that, again, the difference between men and women is that women are allowed by society to complain about their suffering without being demonized for it, and society takes an interest in ameliorating women's suffering when it's expressed. Suffering itself might be universal, but society's responses to suffering, they're not.
yeah, everybody has problems, but I think for men it's like much more masculine. Just be like, I'm just gonna push through. I'm just gonna deal with it. Life hits, you hit harder. I think that's kind of the masculine.
I don't know. You see the MRA, and it's like basically a group that
No,
builds...
that's what I'm saying is the MRA is different for most men, in that the MRA is complaining, but most men don't want to complain.
I don't know, Mike. I don't know if she's going to get it, even though you're explaining it as clearly as humanly possible. You're literally explaining it like she's 5 years old. Let's see.
I think that that's not the reason. I mean, you're a man, so I guess you'd know better than me what men are like. But I think that...
Gigi, you actually remind me of one of my fiance's relatives. This person is the type of person who will literally, and not literally in the way that history literally means his story, but actually literally, they will come out and say they've done no research whatsoever on the topic, and it's clear that you have, but you're still wrong, and they're still right. You literally just said, I mean, you're a man, so I guess you'd know better than me, and then followed it up with, essentially, but you're wrong, and I'm right.
The MRA is wrong.
What'd I tell you, Mike? Here you are, a man, talking about issues facing men as discussed by the men's rights movement, and saying that many of them, in your opinion, are valid, and that the main reason they won't ever be popular is because masculinity promotes strength and stoicism rather than vulnerability and complaint, and it's like you've just expressed yourself to a brick wall. All she has to say is the MRA is wrong. You do realize that she's just essentially said that you're wrong about your experiences as a man, as you have expressed them in this podcast, after prefacing the assertion with the lip service that she guesses you'd know better than she does about what it's like to be a man. She actually just pulled the whole, okay, so you've clearly done a lot of research and I don't actually know what I'm talking about and I haven't done any reading or investigation, but you're still wrong. That thing my fiance's relative does, that absolutely has almost driven me to violence.
And most good men realize that women are the disadvantaged group.
No, Gigi. Most good men have a greater capacity for sympathy and affiliation with women than they do with other men. Most men society deems to be good will attend to the suffering and complaints of women over those of men any day of the week, because that's the literal definition of a good man in the eyes of society. This is why you see posters and ad campaigns that say 250,000 people in the US are homeless. 1/4 of them are women. Please give generously. Or nearly 60 million children are denied basic education globally. Half of them are girls. Please get girls back into the classroom.
And either identify as feminists or at the very least will basically call themselves feminists like you do by saying that you believe in equal rights for the genders.
Feminism doesn't have a monopoly on the concept of equal rights. In fact, it has a piss poor track record in that regard. Just saying.
And I think that most men are smart enough.
You're smart, Mike, right? I mean, you wouldn't want to be associated with a bunch of dumb men, would you? I mean, because smart men are feminists and dumb men are MRAs. And, that's how you feel. So you know you're not, dumb, right? No, you're, smart.
Not to subscribe to the rhetoric that they are some disadvantaged group that needs to band together to fight against angry feminist extremists.
Yes, Mike, just ignore that feminist extremist proverbially kicking you in the groin. Don't worry about a campaign of slander against men, an entire group of people that's been promoted by feminists for the last 150 years. The last thing you want to do, Mike, is say enough is enough. This far, no further. I'm done being shit on just because I'm male. I mean, if enough men did that, there'd be a whole lot less figurative groin kicking going on, and that would be a big problem, don't you think? At least for women like Gigi.
I just don't think that. I think that's the reason it won't gain traction, is that it has some merit in some of the ideas, and I definitely think the suicide rates are a horrible travesty.
Hey, you ever wonder if suicide rates might be tied to the bias in family courts? Because, men are generally 3 to 5 times as likely as women to commit suicide, but in the immediate wake of a family breakup, men are actually up to 10 times more likely than women to commit suicide. But hey, none of that's systemic or anything, because patriarchy.
Men not getting custody of their children when they deserve it is very sad and fucked up and should totally be something that we're working towards. Does the men's rights group need to be a thing? Not really.
Yeah, not really. Feminism's on it. Once feminism has tackled every single issue women face, including mansplaining, manspreading, manslamming, and manterrupting, and achieved equal or better than equal status for women in every single aspect of life, I'm sure they'll start to think about the plight of men institutionally denied their parental rights. I'm positive they'll turn their attention away from ever more trivial microaggressions against women and get to work on the massive humanitarian crisis caused by overt and institutional discrimination against men in terms of their right to be fathers to their children.
That being said, I totally support their right as American citizens to form a group.
And I support your right to be a retard. Isn't free speech great?
Just as I support all of those groups that were protesting, all the men's rights people in the documentary, there were all of these feminists who they portrayed to be these angry women. They did a really great job with that. I was really impressed. I mean,
actually, Cassie didn't portray those feminists as angry women. The feminists involved in the protest represented themselves, Gigi. And the MRAs present represented themselves. If one of them ended up looking worse than the other in terms of their behavior, that's not cinematic sleight of hand. That's just how they were behaving. Again, I would challenge you to find a men's rights group or even a lone MRA who has been recorded assaulting a feminist or the police in the course of his activism, or pulling a fire alarm, or anything like that. The closest you're ever going to get is MRAs who've committed suicide in inconvenient public ways, and one accusation that came to nothing regarding a possible unidentified maybe MRA who might have assaulted a woman in Ontario, and for which MRAs, including my own honey badgers, put up more than $10,000 in reward money toward identifying the person possibly responsible. More than 2 years later, no takers.
to be fair, like when you're at a protest protesting men's rights, like you are going to be pissed off because it's literally everything you are against as a feminist.
You're against men having rights. All feminists would be. And you're supporting the right of feminists to engage in assault and battery against their philosophical opponents and even police. You're supporting the illegal pulling of fire alarms, which diverts emergency resources and services away from actual emergencies. You're supporting men's rights events being shut down rather than challenged with counter-arguments and counter-rhetoric. You've just supported political violence, Gigi, and criminal activity, and you're doing it because you are apparently against men having rights or advocating for their rights. But yes, it's filmmakers like Cassie that make feminists look bad.
Well, what I think the point the movie is making, and the point that another key takeaway, is just the importance of free speech. And, you know, there clearly are some issues facing men, and somebody needs to be able to talk about them, whether they're consider themselves part of the MRA movement or not. It's important.
But you are not.
You are not, Michael. Repeat after me. You are not a part of the MRA movement. Say it, Michael. You've already said it twice, but say it again. You are not a part of the MRA movement. Not if I have anything to say about it.
It's important for there to be free speech, and there was a lot of examples of free speech being silenced. So men are saying, you know, we have these problems, and basically crowds of people are saying, you know, shut up, we don't want to hear from you, this is, you know, sexist or violent or whatever. And I think, you know, the way they were treating these like when the groups were getting together or when there was college professors speaking, and the way they would just completely silence them and just drown them out literally with chanting and noise, I thought was just completely counterproductive. You have to let all ideas be heard.
Not according to Gigi, apparently, because she completely understands and sympathizes with the violent feminist protesters and the feminists who use illegal means to shut down events. She literally said she supported the protesters shown in the documentary. Not peaceful protesters, not protesters engaging in counter-rhetoric, not attending the events in order to challenge the speaker in the question and answer period. She supported what was shown in the movie, illegal violent protests that involved criminal assaults by feminists against attendees and police, the illegal pulling of fire alarms, and the silencing of speakers through disruption. But, like, free speech is, like, important, you know, right? Like, it's like free speech.
I mean, I definitely think that all ideas should be heard, but
some ideas are just, like, wrong and stuff. And those ideas should be heard because, like, reasons and feminism.
some of those MRA people, like, actually perpetuate rape culture.
So what? I mean, I disagree, but even if some of us MRA people did perpetuate the murky, woo-woo, abstract, ephemeral concept of rape culture, so what? Free speech is a concept that doesn't really provide for a lot of buts. And the answer to hateful speech is not to suppress it, but to expose it, kind of like the movie did with the feminist protesters, no?
Extremists. Those are extremists. They were not featured in the movie.
See, and now you've finally upset me. I'd always thought of myself as chief executive rape apologist of Patriarchy Inc., and now you're just completely disregarding my way of identifying Mike. That's as bad as forgetting my preferred pronouns.
Yeah, that's like what people associate the MRA with.
Why is that, Gigi? Is it because the MRM, again, not the MRA, the MRM, is perpetuating rape culture? Or is it because that's what feminists in the media tell people we do? I mean, you're literally saying we shouldn't be listened to because we have a bad reputation, when the reason we have a bad reputation is because people like you don't listen to us and spread misinformation about us. Like, don't listen to these guys because they're all like rape apologists. And also, guys, like, the reason no one listens to you is because people think you're rape apologists. You should probably do something about that. Oh, hey, everyone, like, did you know the MRA are a bunch of rape apologists? No, like, seriously, don't listen to them because they're rape apologists. Geez, MRA guys, you should really stop being such rape apologists. Then maybe people would listen to you.
Right, but as the movie showed, that's not necessarily the case.
Oh, but it is, Mike. We are all rape apologists. We do nothing but promote rape culture day and night. It's pretty much the entire reason we exist. And I know this because your girlfriend told me so. And you know, like, she's studied us Menonists for like not that long, but pretty long. And like she knows what she's talking about because, like reasons and stuff. Also, she's a journalist.
Yeah, maybe not from the higher ups, but a lot of the younger facets of the group who actually are recognized by the MRA actually like do perpetuate like the women hating and stuff.
Now, this is weird. So, apparently, it's privileged, established, middle aged patriarchs like the dastardly Paul Elam who are okay, and the young men who have zero influence who are the problem. Honestly, Gigi, if you have evidence that the young men in the movement are perpetuating hatred against women, please provide it. And even if some of these young men are perpetuating hate against women, are they advocating that anyone act violently on that hate? I mean, all they're saying is men should just leave women alone.
What they were saying in this convention was not women hating. They were just talking about the issues of men, and they were being silenced for that.
Oh, Mike, I applaud your persistence. I hope it lasts. I hope you don't cave. I mean, I don't need you to become an MRA, but you've been so reasonable in this discussion and so polite despite Gigi's complete dismissal of your perspectives from her position of feminist authority, and that's got to take a lot of, well, stoicism, I guess. Especially when she could essentially make your life one of celibate misery. Not that I see what you see in her. Maybe she has what used to be called hidden depths.
No, that I disagree with. I think that people, feminists, people, non-feminists, all people alike, queer, straight, trans, whatever, they associate the MRA with the women hating, the women bashing, the rape culture.
Right.
Well, speaking as a bisexual woman who has several trans women among my subscribers, who has been in this movement long enough to know there is an overrepresentation of bisexual and gay men in it, yeah, I don't think so. And again, when feminists in the mainstream do nothing but tell people MRAs are nothing more than women haters, women bashers, and rape culture perpetuators, is it any wonder that people, including some minorities, would believe we're women haters, women bashers, and rape culture perpetuators? Gigi, you are literally arguing that a group of people should be judged not by what they say and do, but by what other people believe and say about them. There have been other groups through history who were judged not by what they say and do, or by what they profess to believe, but by what others say and believe about them. Just saying.
But that's not necessarily the case, and that's not what was being shown, being shut down in the movie.
Right, but you see those two things are associated, and like, is that correct? Like, no, it's actually not.
No, it's actually not. So who is connecting those two things? Who is falsely connecting men's rights groups with women hating and rape apology? Who's doing that, Gigi?
But that's why they protest, and I actually support their right also to protest.
I support anyone's right to protest, Gigi. What feminists were shown engaging in the film was not protesting, it was disruption, silencing criminal mischief and criminal assault. I support anyone's right to stand outside an event with picket signs, handing out counter literature, and engaging the public in discourse and debate. I support anyone's right to attend a lecture and vigorously challenge the speaker's opinions and rhetoric in the Q&A section. I do not support anyone's right to engage in criminal slander against a group. I do not support anyone's right to violate the criminal code in order to silence other opinions. I do not support anyone's right to engage in criminal intimidation and violence to suppress opposing viewpoints. You're part of a movement, Gigi, that believes some random person on another continent leaving an angry comment under your completely moronic blog post is a terrible, awful, no good, really bad thing that must be stamped out. And yet you are here now supporting the right of feminists to physically intimidate and assault people in real life, in meat space, because in your mind, that's protesting. You claimed you were scared you might have acid thrown in your face at the screening because angry comments under your blog post. Given what you saw in the movie regarding feminists and what you wouldn't be able to find anywhere in the media regarding us, despite the fact that we're routinely and baselessly described as violent, who among you and me has more cause to fear violence from the other side, Gigi? And what's more retarded and hypocritical, Gigi? Someone like me who advocates for free speech, full stop, Or someone like you who belongs to a group that wants to criminalize online trolling when feminists are the target, while simultaneously defending feminists' right to violently assault other people in real life over ideological disagreements.
They have a right to protest.
They don't have a right to commit criminal offenses. Well, I mean, they kind of sort of have a de facto right to do that, since they had the endorsement of the university's women's studies faculty and the largest public sector unit in Canada, and despite all of the criminal offenses being caught on camera, no arrests were ever made by police, and no statement of condemnation was made by the university. None of those students were even disciplined. So essentially, the establishment tacitly endorses criminal violence from certain people who are politically favored, and then portrays a peaceful group with not a single act of political violence to their name as violent and dangerous.
They have a right to they have a right to speak out against the movement, but to silence the other side, I thought was
They're allowed to try.
Again, not by using criminal means. They aren't. Wrongfully pulling a fire alarm in Canada is a criminal offense. So is assault and battery. So is trespassing on a private space that has been bought and paid for by someone else. So is barricading doors and preventing people from passing, especially when there's a fire alarm going off and the building is evacuating. So is wearing masks during a protest.
It's legal. Legally allowed there.
right, illegal. But what I'm saying is, free speech is really critical to having constructive conversations.
And they are. They talk all the time.
Says the woman who's monopolized 3/4 of this podcast, who has incessantly interrupted her co-host and who is speaking as the authority on all issues regarding men.
All over the place, including in this documentary.
Again, who would have thought a documentary about the men's rights movement would provide a platform for actual men's rights activists to express their point of view? I mean, that's not how this shit is supposed to work, is it, Gigi? It's supposed to be like a documentary on Jews produced by the Nazis in 1936, or maybe Birth of a Nation. You know, the original, not the new one. It certainly isn't supposed to portray MRAs as human beings. I mean, honestly, I don't know what Cassie J was thinking.
Do I think
Yeah,
people...
but what I'm saying is, in the movie they showed how a lot of their meetings and speeches were being shut down.
Well, they're considered a hate group.
Gigi, the movie expressly dealt with that allegation right there on the screen, specifically. Despite what people like you have said repeatedly, that the SPLC officially listed MRAs as a hate group, the SPLC has explicitly and repeatedly denied any such thing and has attempted numerous times to correct the record. But you guys just keep on saying it, don't you? We're not a hate group, Gigi. That was all just feminists reading between the lines and wishful thinking.
So
Right.
people
But they're not.
protest against a hate group.
But like I said, they're not necessarily a hate group.
Well, they
and they're
actually
not-
are allowed to assemble, and they were allowed to assemble in that square, and they were allowed to go to that college and stuff, and they were exercising their right to do that.
They were allowed
and then
to.
the students were exercising their right to protest. So
Yeah,
actually, everyone was exercising their rights correctly.
Right. They have rights, but I'm saying it was, I think, not productive to just go and make a bunch of noise and not allow them to talk about the issues.
Not only was it not productive, it was completely criminal.
I just don't know what you thought would have been productive.
Well, I think we all know what you think would be productive. A conversation where you are the arbiter of truth, wherein you are free to interrupt people at will, interject your opinions, informed or otherwise, and essentially dismiss the entirety of what your conversation partner has to say about his own lived experiences and his own observations. Oh, and then you get to imply that he's the one who's not engaging in a productive conversation. I'm almost positive that Mike has a different definition of productive.
Talking about the issues, having arguments, doing podcasts, doing YouTube videos, having conversations, letting all voices be heard.
I do think a lot of it. I mean, the thing is, protests, even when it's peaceful protests, is often angry.
Like the angry comments under your blog posts that were protesting what you wrote, you know, peaceful in that there was nothing credibly threatening, but still angry.
And they literally pulled a fire alarm and the building had to be evacuated. So
yeah, one of the speeches, the protesters pulled the fire alarm. And
actually, it was more than one men's rights speech, Gigi. What was shown in the film was just one incident of that happening. But the fire alarm has been pulled more than once.
They have to evacuate the building. and can't finish a lecture about misandry and misogyny. And like, I actually think those issues are important to talk about.
But yeah, I actually think it's totally not like cool for Menonists to be like talking about them because they're just wrong. Like the Menonists totally haven't done their research. And so it's like totally okay to shut down a Menonist event talking about those issues because like the Menonists are just wrong.
And that's not what I'm saying. I do think free speech is really important. I do think that the men's rights people actually should voice their opinions. I think this is America and you can say whatever you want.
Those illegal protests happened in Canada, Gigi. You might have realized that if you'd been paying attention to the actual movie.
And if you have a message, you should be allowed to tell people it. But I also support those people's right to peacefully protest, which they were.
An example of a peaceful protest in the movie would be the rally held by MRAs, or the intactivists protesting against circumcision at that V-Day rally. Assaulting people, barricading doors, pulling fire alarms, and engaging in intimidation is not peaceful protest, Gigi.
I don't think they should have pulled the fire alarm. I think that was extreme.
Oh, totally, totally. I mean, the assaulting attendees and police wasn't. But the fire alarm thing, that's where you draw the line, right?
Right, that's what I'm talking about.
But when you get really wrapped up with a mob of people, like, shit, someone's going to pull the fucking fire alarm. Let's be real.
Well, interestingly enough, it's never happened at any event a men's rights advocate or group has protested. I mean, let's be real. Some people know how to behave and others don't.
Yeah, not cool.
People love drama.
Not cool. So, other takeaways?
Well, basically, I walked out at the very end of the movie. Cassie, she's like very whistle. She's like, one thing I did take away is, and immediately as we're walking out of the movie, I was just like, I mean, I'm a much stronger feminist than I was when I walked in, and I was already like pretty balls to the wall, like feminist. I'm not like burning my bra or hating men. I love men. They're pretty rad.
Okay. Now, here's something that I'd actually really love it if you took the time to listen to. Because it's very interesting, Gigi. Cassie's journey took 2 years. Your journey, or your investigation into the men's rights movement, that took 2 hours. Somehow you believe that Cassie, after talking for 2 hours with Paul Elam or myself or Fred Hayward, she just like instantly converted. She just instantly came over to our side. It was just that easy. You seem to have missed what she described in her voiceovers and her video diaries, that she had an initial reflexive impulse to embrace feminism even more staunchly and rigidly than she had before any MRA had invited her to challenge her beliefs. Now, this is a phenomenon called belief perseverance. You should look it up. It's a universal human phenomenon. And I'm going to give you an example that doesn't have anything to do with gender from, one that I mentioned earlier in this series of videos, the example of Ignaz Semmelweis. Now, if you recall, he was the guy who discovered that getting doctors to wash their hands after handling corpses reduced rates of childbed fever by 90%. Now, he was fired, and he died friendless and penniless in a mental institution after being essentially blacklisted as a quack by the medical establishment at the time. Now, why was he blacklisted and smeared? Well, it was because it wasn't because he was full of shit. It was because he had hard, solid, reliable results in black and white, irrefutable results. And those results, because they were irrefutable, they called into question the entire way the medical establishment of the day conceptualized disease. You see, Gigi, germs hadn't actually been discovered, or maybe you feminists would say invented yet. Medicine at the time was still dominated by the four humors and nervous excitation theories around disease. Preventing infection through hand washing, well, there was just no way to fit that reality into the unifying paradigm of the four humors. So accepting Semmelweis's results as valid would require a complete overhaul of medicine. The four humors paradigm would have to essentially be completely scrapped if the new information was to be accommodated. Now, if people were 100% logical, like Mr. Spock, and not emotional, the medical establishment, even if it believed that it was right about the four humors and all of that, they would have simply just incorporated hand washing into its best practices and seen those dramatic reductions in rates of childbed fever and childbed death continue. They would have said, well, we don't know why it works, but we do know that it works, so let's just run with this and save some lives. No harm, no foul. But they didn't, because people aren't actually logical and they don't generally respond in a logical way to new information that threatens their existing worldview. They didn't because the idea that disease could be prevented by washing one's hands caused physicians who'd invested their entire lives into one paradigm of medicine to doubt the entirety of that paradigm. And it wasn't enough to just let Semmelweis be and let him do his hand washing thing. However wacky and eccentric it might be, it would ultimately be harmful to doctors and patients. It wouldn't cause any harm. But no, he had to be discredited and destroyed. His evidence that suggested the four humors model might be wrong had to be completely suppressed and completely dismissed and completely cast into disrepute. And the four humors model was then even more vigorously embraced by those physicians in response to the challenging evidence. Now, the way to discredit Semmelweis was to fire him, sabotage his career, and label him a quack, which essentially ruined his life. Now, Cassie spent 2 or 3 years investigating the men's rights movement. She resisted every step of the way. She described how early on she became a more stolid and dyed-in-the-wool feminist, going out of her way to join feminist groups and to make feminist-themed video diaries. And somehow, you think she just swallowed our point of view in one bite, first day, not even pausing to chew. You think her journey lasted the exact same 2 hours that you saw on the screen. And you somehow believe that your belief perseverance is indicative of the objective truth of your beliefs and has nothing to do with any universal tendency on the part of humans to reject and repudiate any evidence that challenges their deeply held presuppositions. So really, Gigi, it's really not a shock to hear you say you're even more invested in your feminism than you were before seeing this film.
So I hope nobody takes that away. It's like, I do love men.
Then why do you subscribe to a belief system that holds them ultimately to blame for all of the world's problems?
I think that all humans are beautiful and amazing.
Except the ones who perpetuate rape culture by having penises and complaining about their difficulties.
And I'm dating an amazing man.
Yeah, he is. You don't deserve him.
My father's an amazing man. I know many amazing men. Men in general are great.
Men in general are the patriarchy, Gigi. You know, that system that was set up to benefit men at women's expense, which men control because they have more institutional power, and which men could change but choose not to because they'd rather oppress women. You know? That patriarchy.
But they are not a disenfranchised group.
Except in the ways that they are.
And women are.
By what? Sexist air conditioning? Manspreading? Mean comments on the internet? Not being able to accuse a man and have him go directly to prison? I mean, how are women disenfranchised?
So we need to have equal rights for everybody.
In the industrialized world, men have fewer rights than women do. There is no right in the West that men have that women do not, but there are rights women have that men don't.
Because if women have equal rights in the workplace and equal rights in society, then men will ultimately benefit from that because they will get to have the primary or the joint custody of their children.
No, not necessarily. You're just assuming that if men overwhelmingly took on an equal role in childcare, they would no longer be discriminated against in terms of custody. That's a complete non sequitur. It makes no logical sense. It's like saying, well, if all the slaves just increased their output and were extra well behaved, I'm sure slavery would just magically be abolished. I mean, we really can't be expected to abolish slavery until the slaves earn it, right? Like, it's wishful thinking, right? And number 2, it's putting the cart before the horse. It's demanding an entire group change their behavior in order for any given member of that group to be treated fairly. And that's not okay. Wouldn't introducing shared custody legislation be the more simple solution to this? I mean, as opposed to demanding that an entire group of people who know they can be stripped of their parental rights and role at any moment earn those rights before they get them?
They won't have to, they can stay home if they want to, and everybody wins, and then kumbaya, we have a fucking happy society.
Yeah, after men earn their rights, right? Because that's just how it is for men. You don't get rights, you pay for them.
Yeah, well, first off, I think I'm so impressed with Gigi for going to this movie, for being open to these new ideas.
Thanks, babe.
It's really challenging to be willing to do something like that. So first off, Gigi's the MVP tonight.
Mike, I salute you. You have the patience of Job.
And she stayed relatively calm throughout the movie, though she had her moments of...
I did have a couple like gasps in there, and kind of like I did laugh out loud a couple times because it was just like so ridiculous.
Elaborate, please.
That I was just like, are we seriously talking about this? Like, oh my god,
But
I cannot believe we're talking about this.
But overall, she stayed pretty calm. She wasn't too triggered, so I gotta, respect her for being open to the new ideas.
Okay, so no elaboration other than, oh my god, so there were like moments when I just couldn't even.
Well, at the very end, like when we were walking out, like everybody stayed in their seats. Like literally, Mike and I like ran out, and like people were whispering, like, "Oh, where are they leaving?" Blah blah. Blah. They must have like assumed I was like a writer, or I don't know what they thought we were leaving for, because it turned out that one of the men's rights, like honey badgers, like the women who support men's rights, was literally outside the theater, and she was like gonna come do a Q&A.
Oh my god, no, not a honey badger. And a Q&A where people can express different opinions and ask challenging questions? Heaven forfend! You wouldn't want anything to do with any of that.
And I was really glad we left because I
was just so annoyed and I couldn't think of any questions or comments to bring up in the Q&A and like triggered. Also, I was like worried about acid attacks.
I'm not an angry person, and I really am open to all the new ideas.
Yes, you are an angry person. And no, you are not open at all to new ideas. But don't despair, Gigi. It doesn't make you bad. It just makes you normal.
But I had just spent 2 hours like surrounded by MRA activists and had just watched a 2-hour documentary about it. And I was like maxed out on MRA. I do not think I could have dealt with it IRL for another like hour.
The Q&A was 25 minutes long, but okay. I can hear you. It's never fun to feel outnumbered. It's never fun to feel like you're alone in hostile territory. Welcome to my world, Gigi.
Whew.
Yeah, so I think the movie wasn't super persuasive. Obviously, maybe it will...
What are your feelings on feminism, though?
I believe in equal rights for women and
You're a feminist?
for men.
Please don't slap stickers on people, Gigi. Feminism does not have a monopoly on the concept of equality. Also, Mike, convincing is kind of a subjective word. I mean, the movie might not have convinced you to become a full-fledged meninist, but it did seem to convince you, or maybe confirm an existing sense in your mind, that men have issues they face, and that feminism's paradigm and approach might not be 100% accurate or the proper tool to deal with them. It seemed to convince you that us meninists aren't all just women haters and regressive right-wing traditionalists who want women barefoot and pregnant. It seemed to convince you that feminism is not necessarily the benign and benevolent group that does nothing all day but promoting peace, love, and harmony. And maybe that's the highest praise that I could give Cassie. She didn't set out to make a piece of recruitment propaganda. She just set out to present men's issues and men's activists in the most honest way she could by interviewing men's activists about the issues men face. Even Cassie herself is not an MRA, even after almost 3 years of production on this project and coming to sympathize with us. This is not a movie determined to make you believe something. It's a movie determined to make you question your beliefs. And that, in my opinion, is the greatest gift anyone could give to the MRM. It's the outstretched hands, one with a blue pill and one with a red one. It's not an IV drip or Kool-Aid laced with cyanide force-fed to a congregation. It's a choice. And whatever choice any individual makes when they are presented with these two viewpoints, that's really up to them. I might think they're stupid. But as long as they're making a free choice based on all of the information, I guess I have to be okay with that.
I just don't agree with a lot of the things the feminists talk about and don't talk about.
I feel like I don't.
We'll talk about that in another podcast.
Okay. We can talk about why you're not a feminist in another podcast. That'll be super fun.
You sound enthused.
Sure, yeah.
Sounds like a good time. Anyway, we had a really good time at the movie. It was really fun. We got to split a Milky Way bar afterward and talk about it all the way home, and it was just like a really good experience, and I'm really glad that we went. Aren't you?
It was a great time.
I love you.
Love you too.
Also, you're not an MRA, right? Because that would be just gross and abusive. Say it again. You're not actually an MRA.
That's all the time we have for this episode. You can follow Mike and I on Twitter.
Okay, pet peeve, grammar Nazi here. It's Mike and me, not Mike and I. A good way to figure out which pronoun is correct is to erase Mike, kind of like you did in a lot of this podcast. You can follow I on Twitter makes no sense. You can follow me on Twitter makes sense. So it is you can follow Mike and me on Twitter. That is the correct usage. Likewise, me and Mike are on Twitter is wrong because me am on Twitter is wrong. It's I am on Twitter, therefore it's Mike and I are on Twitter. Easy peasy Gigi. Do better.
At Gigi Angle and at mfishbine. Check out our website at dirtysexymonogamy.com for the latest episodes and updates. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
I don't think I'll be following either one of you on Twitter. Then again, I barely follow anyone on Twitter, and I detest Twitter on principle. But, just in case you were wondering why I haven't followed either of you, it's because Twitter is cancer. And once again, I'm going to reiterate, good luck with all of this, Mike. You seem like a reasonable guy. Gigi seems pushy, bossy, domineering, and a bit of a drama llama. I mean, I'm no peach to live with, but I can't even imagine the amount of conceding the point you need to do on a daily basis with this woman. I know some people in my comments section have called you a mangina, or a cuck, or a beta, or a pussy whipped, or whatever. I'm not going to call you that. Other commenters have actually admired your balls, metaphorical ones anyway, for staking your claim to your ground against the gatekeeper of your sex life, and I tend to agree with them. So I'm going to leave you, Mike, with 2 minutes of wisdom from one of my favorite people in the world, Bill Burr. And I don't even care if YouTube demonetizes this video because I used a clip that was more than 20 seconds long. You need to hear this, and so does every other man, especially the very, very, very last bit. So, here you go. My gift to you.
This is how they argue, as far as I can tell. All right? If they're right, they argue the point. And they stay on point and make sure you stay on point until you're down on your knees, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. All right? No problem with that. Totally respect it. But here's the thing. If they're wrong, they go rogue. They go off-road. They start thinking of shit you're sensitive about. Maybe you don't get along with your dad. And in their head, they just start concocting this evil statement. Totally designed, this desperate Hail Mary attempt to make you so fucking mad, you just call them a cunt. That's what it is. And cunt trumps all the bullshit they did to start the argument. Now it's not about that. Well, that's no reason to call me a cunt. And then that's it. You're in this room now, right? My girl knows my big fear in life is to be that dude who grows old, grows old alone, has like that basement apartment, just screaming up at the younger couple, turn it down! That isn't music! So I noticed that anytime she was losing a fight, out of nowhere, she'd just be like, well, that's why you're just gonna grow old and be alone. Then I'd lose my shit. The next thing you know, I'm in the kitchen washing dishes for the 9th fucking time in a row. This is what the argument was about. I was so right. What happened? So if you learn anything from my ignorance tonight, just know this. Next time you're in a battle with your beautiful woman, your wife, girlfriend, whatever, and they start out of nowhere, okay? You're winning, and they just start saying that crazy shit out of nowhere. Just know in that moment you've won the fight, okay? All right? Don't get mad. Bob and weave, slip all of that shit. Maybe because you got a little dick. Just let that slide. Stay in the pocket of the argument. Okay? It's over. The argument is over. You've won. Just take a knee and run out the clock. All right? Yes. Lean on the ropes. Let them punch themselves out. And then in the end, you throw their psychology right back at them. Well, maybe we should discuss it later when you calm down. And they won't hook up with you for a couple of days. Who cares? Who cares? You rub one out. Rub one out like a man. It's the champagne of victory.